Welcome to Think Travel Leadership Circle, a podcast series where we talk to industry leaders about the latest and greatest travel trends. I'm Hermione Joye, Sector Lead for Travel, based in Singapore for Google Asia Pacific. People have developed a newfound appreciation for travel due to the pandemic and the limited experiences that were available to them. With this heightened appreciation for travel, we've also seen heightened expectations from travellers. Today I had the pleasure of speaking to Lucy Werner, Vice President of Rosewood Group Hotels, to understand how the brand is approaching travellers today and their new expectations. Hi Lucy, and thank you so much for joining us for Think Travel Leadership Circle podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here today. Now, I'm a huge fan of Rosewood and everything that you have been doing in your properties, but would you mind sharing a little bit about, for our audience, about yourself and the company?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, thanks for the invite. It's fantastic to be back and great to see you. So I'm Lucy Werner. I lead commercial for Rosewood. So that encompasses our global sales, marketing, revenue management, and digital and custom experience. We have 3 hotel brands. So Rosewood, which is our ultra luxury New World, which is mostly focused on Asia Pacific, sort of more focused on business travel, and then Cost, our lifestyle brand, as well as 2 concepts, Asaya, our wellness and spa, and then Carlisle & Co., which is our members club. And before I joined Rosewood, I was a long-term Googler and led the cloud business in Hong Kong and was a peer with you with travel across APAC. So wonderful to be back.
You guys are the experts, or one of the experts, in what we'd call the crop of the new high flyers that's coming out in travel. And I'd love to pick your brains around luxury travel and what you're seeing as, across the various brands that you have and have mentioned. One thing that we're seeing a lot in our data or our insights is that we believe that trips are kind of becoming a milestone event. And I was curious to see if you're seeing similar type of trends come through your data, and also like what changes you're seeing in terms of booking behaviours post-pandemic. Maybe you could share what happened in like pre-pandemic and then post-pandemic.
You know, indeed, we see a return or revenge travel happening specifically this summer. There's obviously a lot of pent-up demand after the pandemic, and we see consumers taking longer splurge trips with a real willingness to pay higher ADRs. The recovery is obviously being led by US and Europe. Asia Pacific is a little slower to recover. Obviously, some of the restrictions are still in place across China. So, the data that we see is incredibly strong from the US to Europe this summer. We've seen triple the demand as pre-pandemic. So in Rosewood, we're like, it's the summer of Americans going to Europe, mainly tier 1 destinations like London and Paris and Italy. The UK has also had a strong rebound. So the UK is up around 20% from pre-pandemic times in terms of travel. We also see longer lead times. So when we touch on the US, so I spoke a little bit about, the pent-up demand from US to Europe. The lead time has increased 20 days from the US. So the typical US consumers booking their stay with Rosewood about 49 days out. EMAC, so Europe and Middle East are also up on lead time, so around 17 days. And then Asia Pacific has shortened their booking window, so that is shortened by around 4 days, just due to the fluidity of COVID restrictions and changes. But we do believe that China and Asia will rebound incredibly strongly as COVID eases. We've seen increased demand for Philippines, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And as restrictions ease in China, we've seen incredibly strong bookings in like Dalian and Sanya and Guangzhou.
That sounds very positive and also quite interesting in terms of the dynamics. In terms of ADRs, what's been the biggest change in driving that? Is it just that are they booking different type of rooms? Are they staying for longer, or could you talk us through that? And then for those who are listening, ADRs are average daily rate that people would spend at a hotel.
Yeah, so there's definitely been a shift to booking larger rooms, so suites and then residences. We've seen that the consumers are traveling either with groups of friends or with families, and that's kind of driving the demand for more suite inventory, more residences, and then we've actually experienced longer stays. And as a result of that, consumer behavior is different when they, are arriving on property. So they're looking for more in-destination experiences, more ancillary services like private chefs coming into the villas to cook, or, experiencing different aspects and attributes of the resort and then beyond the resort, which has really helped us to sort of morph our offers beyond hospitality into more experiences and sort of bringing luxury lifestyle to our consumers.
There's a theme for travel for love, which is, travel with your family. And obviously, with the pandemic, with resetting values, I think people are really keen to have that interpersonal connection, whether it's families or close friends, and are really wanting to make sure they make the most of every moment in travel, so that staying together previously where they may not have or averse visiting. When you were first talking, you just touched on the sort of city destinations. Are you seeing, post-pandemic, we saw in our data a huge shift for people to have wellness and also nature-based stays. Now, I know you have a very diverse property set. Are you seeing, now we talked also about the revenge traveller, myself, a large revenge traveller, and it's a lot of fun, but I've noticed the way my behaviour has changed, and I'm also seeing this in the data, is that, the revenge traveller really went straight to the wellness and nature destinations, and now is flipping back into the city. So we were just in Greece, we did Corfu, but then we actually spent time in Athens to do that traditional type of experience. What are you seeing in terms of how consumers are behaving and what type of destinations they're desiring?
We're seeing very similar trends. So as the pandemic hit, our resorts in Mexico and the Caribbean experienced a surge. So 2021, were record years for Mexico. A lot of that was, due to proximity to the US and also, the COVID protocols and need to sort of get PCRs and COVID tests to re-enter the US. So people sort of stayed closer to home. We have now seen a shift of those consumers that were either going to Mexico or staying local and going to resorts like in California. We have Miramar and Santa Barbara. And those travelers are shifting to do city escapes in Europe predominantly, or New York. So yes, there's definitely a change in travel patterns, and we've also seen longer hauls. So the UK I mentioned has picked up, but also markets like Brazil. So we opened a property in Brazil earlier this year in Sao Paulo, and we've actually seen quite a large increase in Brazil as a feeder market, which is quite long haul to destinations like the US and Europe.
In terms of the mix of what people are wanting and the longer stays, are you seeing, we talk a little bit about the rebound of business travel. Are you seeing that in your data? Is there a preference? Because obviously I feel like companies are a bit more frugal, but I'm not really sure how that pans out across a diverse brand group from yours, and if there is nuances between, say, the US, EMEA, and also Asia.
So the recovery was definitely led by leisure, and we saw, the transient and high ADR sort of return first. But we have seen a pickup in corporate and group. So we've had, let's say group rebounded second, and then corporate is actually at around 120% of pre-pandemic levels. So we have seen our group business fully recover.
And is that corporate for, like traveling like a CEO, so they're in and out, or is that more corporate in terms of events?
So it's a mix. So it's incentive groups, for example, like President's Club, or groups through consortia. But there is also travel. So we've actually seen specifically this summer a return of corporations traveling and gathering, at hotels to kind of bring their teams back together. So very encouraging, obviously led by US and Europe, but we are seeing in Southeast Asia a strong rebound as well in those two segments of group and corporate.
I mean, I think the recovery has surprised us all right through the globe, and even in APAC and more relevantly Southeast Asia. I mean, we're without the strong hook of business travel, we've already recovered to pre-pandemic volumes in terms of interest and demand. And then you can see that booking at long window. We see that also in terms of the insights that are coming from our clients and talking to people. In terms of booking out longer, is there a reason why you think people are doing that?
No, I think people are, planning these big longer stay trips, and they require a sort of more thought and planning. And I think that's what's really driving the long booking window.
And is there a supply issue? Are you finding that you're sold out?
In certain destinations, I mean, Paris, London, Italy, have had a lot of demand this summer. I think the other thing worth mentioning is just the complexity with flights, specifically in Europe. There've been a lot of flight cancellations that has made the situation fluid, and so we sort of see it as a year of things slowly normalizing and stabilizing in terms of consumer demand, travel patterns. Airlift, which is obviously a big driver of hotel demand.
And in terms of demand, I was just wondering, across your portfolio, how are you seeing travelers engage with your brand?
Yeah, so there's pent up demand. There's more demand for experiences once they are on property, driven by the longer stays and larger groups. We have really been focused on adding on ancillary offers to kind of, surface or experience, add on those experiences for our customers. And then we're also adding on ancillary offerings. So if you look at some of our properties like Rosewood, Hong Kong, they've got quite robust offerings on e-commerce, because what we do see is a demand once consumers leave property to be able to still access our brand. So whether it's wellness or F&B or apparel offerings kind of linked to the luxury lifestyle of Rosewood, we've seen incredibly strong demand for that as well once consumers leave property.
That certainly doesn't surprise me, because with this milestone and luxury travel that I feel that is coming through, and the mix in the generations that are coming through with Gen Z and Y, having a branded hat or being able to share the moment of a high tea at Hong Kong Rosewood is really part of that experience and part of the reason that you're paying to be at that property. In terms of how consumers are coming to and finding Rosewood, are you seeing any change in behaviour in terms of how they find your hotel properties pre-pandemic and post-pandemic?
Yeah, big shift to digital. So, we've seen our digital bookings go up by about 47% year on year. So, as consumers are coming back, they are booking direct. I think there's several reasons for that, right? The need for flexibility based on COVID, based on, changes with flight cancellations. And, so we're seeing digital kind of leading the way and leading recovery. We've put a lot of measures in place pre, during, and sort of post-pandemic to be able to cater to consumer expectations. So I can give you an example with COVID, when consumers were leaving the US, if they had a risk of testing positive for COVID, they might be stranded in that destination. So we actually introduced something called Travel with Confidence that we put in place for our resorts, for example, in the Caribbean, where if a customer tested positive for COVID, either we would host them in a suite covering all their F&B up to $150 a day on our expense, or we would airlift them on a jet back to the closest port of entry in the US. So, we were sort of putting measures like this in place if consumers book direct, to give them confidence to kind of take the risk of leaving the US and take a break during COVID.
Now, you've talked a bit about them wanting to do more experiences on property, but in terms of how they're expecting the brand to engage, are you seeing changes in terms of a desire for personalization, or perhaps also wanting more from the brand? Could you share more about how the consumer is sort of operating and engaging with your brand and their expectations, and also how that change has happened pre-pandemic and post-pandemic?
In terms of consumer profiles, we've seen our consumer profiles shift a little bit younger pre to post-pandemic. So pre-pandemic, the average Rosewood consumer was around 40. Blended across all the regions currently, the average Rosewood customer is around 38. We see US consumers being slightly older at around 48, and then Europe and Asia make up the difference, skewing younger. We've also seen a higher rate of return stays across our properties and across our brands. And, consumers are definitely sort of coming back, trying out different properties. And then, as I'd mentioned, we're adding on more ancillary experiences through digital. So I mentioned, 47% increase in book direct, and we're offering, once you've booked your stay, to be able to add on those auxiliary experiences, and then also add on lifestyle offers through e-commerce, in related or ancillary categories like apparel and wellness and F&B. So really sort of rounding out our offering, and also, a shift to intergenerational travel, larger groups traveling, and then adding on ancillary offerings like, chefs coming into your villa or residence to cook meals, massage services, in your residence, etc.
So there's a lot of chatter about this pent-up demand, the revenge traveler, but how much is this here to stay? What are your views in terms of what the future will look and the mix of travel in the next sort of 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, so obviously globally there are continued changes afoot, right, with high inflation, and we still see from forward pace very, very strong consumer pent-up demand. I'm very excited to see when COVID restrictions ease in China, what that rebound will mean across Southeast Asia and globally, because what we have seen is a strong rebound in China. So I mentioned areas like Sanya and Dalian, and, as restrictions have eased, we've seen 90% occupancy, almost immediately as restrictions ease. So we definitely see kind of a second wave of pent-up demand coming from China. And so, we are incredibly optimistic about the future. I think, there's definitely going to be a normalization of regions like the Americas that have kind of recovered first, but there will be a second wave from Asia Pacific.
You look after one of the world's most premium brands and hotels. What are your top tips in terms of getting deals for the traveler out there? Can you share any inside secrets?
Book direct. Yeah, we really trying to make sure that we've got good rate parity across channels, and we are looking at how we offer advanced purchase. And I would say, there's certain times of year, so whether it's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Double 11, where they're good deals. So watch out for those deals to come over the coming holiday periods.
I have one more last question, because it is really topical at the moment, and it is around sustainability. We're seeing high growth, but lower volume in terms of sustainability. In terms of expectations of customers, are you seeing a strong desire for that, and are you building for that? Do you think this is just a fad, post-pandemic, and how are you guys viewing sustainability in the travel space?
So sustainability is one of our core principles. So we build our resorts and hotels with sustainability in mind. So we're LEED certified in many of the hotels and resorts. And then sustainability measures are incorporated throughout the customer experience. So for example, we don't have single-use plastic. We provide, water bottles, and there's water fountains installed all throughout the properties. So, we are looking at food recycling, and also, how beyond sustainability within the properties, how we uplift the communities. So we just launched an initiative, Rosewood Empowers, where we are, for example, introducing schools in communities around our Mexican resorts, because, many of our employees and their families, have small children. And so beyond sustainability on the property, we're looking at how do we sustain the communities around our properties in the destinations.
Lucy, I just want to wrap by saying thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing so much on luxury travel and the way Rosewood is approaching this sort of new post-pandemic endemic world. And just thank you for your time today.
Great to see you. Thanks so much.